Hey everybody, it's Audrey from Audrey Approved. Welcome back. I hope y'all are doing well. A few weeks ago, I did a video on book pairings where I compared two different books that I thought were similar for various reasons. And I had a lot of fun with it. So today I'm going to be doing a similar idea, but I'm going to pair nonfiction books with popular film releases. Maybe one or two caveats before I start. Firstly, I'm going to use timestamps. Well, I always use timestamps, but the timestamps are going to correspond to the films that I'll be comparing books to. And so there's going to be spoilers for those films. That's, I don't know how to talk about it without that. Secondly, I'm not doing film adaptations of books. So, for example, I really liked the nonfiction piece, Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. That has a movie adaptation coming out this year, which is the same exact title. And so that's an example of a book and film pairing, but that's a direct adaptation. I'm not doing those today. I'm doing two separate, separate entities that either have to do with a similar topic or, pair in certain ways. You'll have to find out how. So the first book and film pairing that I want to talk about has to do with bringing extinct species back to life. And when you think of films, right, one that first comes to mind is Jurassic Park, which is a 1993 release. Everybody knows the story for it, but basically scientists have brought dinosaurs back to life, and they've done this by extracting dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes that have been fossilized within amber. And so a book that I want to pair with this is a book written by a scientist who actually works on the whole idea of de-extinction. And so this book is How to Clone a Mammoth, the Science of De-Extinction by Beth Shapiro. And Beth Shapiro is, an evolutionary biologist. She focuses on ancient DNA. She's a professor over at UC Santa Cruz, and she actively works on the science of de-extinction. So in the movie, these scientists are bringing these dinosaurs back to life so they can fill an amusement park, right? It's done for commercialization. But in real life, the study of de-extinction has a lot of overlaps with conservation and with ecology. And what I really liked about this book was just the overall focus on not the flashiness of bringing extinct species back to life, but the nuances of what that would mean. So what are the ethics and what are the takeaways and the implications of bringing, a species back to life? One thing that stood out to me that Shapiro goes into a lot of detail with is just the really wide definition of what de-extinction means. For some people, it's very similar to the movies. It's getting ancient DNA out of fossilized remains. And Shapiro goes into the field to talk to her colleagues who are actively working on that. For others, the definition is maybe a little bit more fluid, right? If you can breed mammoth-like traits into a species that exists today, so say the white elephant, which lives down in Southeast Asia, if you could breed traits like furrier hair or bigger size into that species so that they could exist and live within the natural environment of a mammoth, you've really replaced or you've brought back an organism that plays a similar role to what the mammoth did within its environment. And so for some people, that is also considered de-extinction. And it's really these types of nuances and details and minor things, the ethics of it, how you finance it, all of these kinds of things that, really shine, I think, within this book. This is really, maybe a better subtitle would be all the things that you should think about before you bring a species back to life or something like that, although it's not as eloquent. But yeah, I enjoyed this book. It wasn't my absolute favorite. It is pretty heavy on the biochemistry, so if you really don't like biochemistry, you might not like this book, but I thought it was really informative, and of course, it pairs really well with Jurassic Park. So I have no shame admitting that I really like the film The Da Vinci Code, which stars Tom Hanks and is based off of the book by the same name, Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. And it's, a mystery thriller that covers the idea that Jesus had a wife, he married Mary Magdalene, and he has like a living progeny. And so a book that I'm going to pair with the Da Vinci Code is eerily similar in the concept that the Da Vinci Code kind of introduced, which is the idea of Jesus being married, right? And so I'm going to compare that film to Veritas, a Harvard professor, a con man, and the Gospel of Jesus' Wife by Ariel Sabar. Now, this is a piece of nonfiction that covers the real-life events that occurred after the release of both the film and book, The Da Vinci Code. And it's about many things, but it's about a professor at the Harvard Divinity School who in 2012 announced that she had discovered this papyrus, or I guess maybe the singular would be papyri, that suggested that Jesus had a wife. And so she called this papyri the Gospel of Jesus' Wife. So the author was an investigative journalist reporting on this story when it was actually actively happening. And as you might think, right, it caused a big uproar within both Christian and academic circles. And he goes into extreme detail in this book to really recount all the events that occurred and the truth behind, the Gospel of Jesus' Wife. This is a really good mix of Christian history, but from a secular point of view. It has elements of fine art crime, as that subtitle would suggest, with the word con man. It covers, Egyptology, and it also covers the pressures and rigors of academic research. And, these are all subject matters that I like reading about just in general, and so this was a really delightful find and read for me. I did really, really enjoy it. I think the author, he's so thorough in his reporting that at times it got a little bit bogged down in all of the details, especially, maybe the last quarter of the book. But overall, this was a wild ride, and I really enjoyed it. And, again, great pairing with the Da Vinci Code. A third pairing I want to do starts with the movie Hidden Figures, which covers experiences of three Black women who worked for NASA and were part of a segregated group of women that did a whole bunch of calculations that were really vital and really important to the success of NASA's first space mission. So it was a great story of forgotten women and their contributions to really big accomplishments. And so on that theme, I'm going to pair this with The Riddle of the Labyrinth, The Quest to Crack an Ancient Code by Margalit Fox, which I actually talked about in my 2022 favorites because I just absolutely loved this book last year. So everybody knows about spaceflight, but not everybody knows about Linear B, which is the subject of this book. And what it is it's a forgotten language that was found on these tablets that were discovered on the island of Crete in the late 1800s. And for many, many decades, these tablets were just total enigmas. People didn't know what language it was, how you read it, how you pronounced it. They didn't know anything about these tablets at all. And it wasn't until the 1950s that an English architect named Michael Ventris actually deciphered the tablets and uncovered which language they actually represented, which you're gonna have to read the book to find out. Now, what people don't always acknowledge about Michael Ventris's successes in deciphering Linear B is that he based a lot of his deduction and his guesses off of work that was done by a forgotten female American classicist named Alice Colbert. Alice Colbert died before Linear B was actually deciphered, but it really was her contributions that helped Michael Ventris be so successful. And so this is why Hidden Figures and The Riddle of the Labyrinth are such a good pairing, because while they're different subject matters and different topics, they both have to do with women that have been forgotten within history, even though they made, big advances and big contributions to really important things. I'm not a linguist. I don't know anything about languages, but I was able to follow along with this book with some focus. You should definitely read it in print or ebook so you can follow along with all the visual additions that the author has added. But I just think it's a wonderful read. There's this element of mystery that pulls you all the way to the end because you want to find out what language this forgotten script is. And yeah, it was one of my favorite books of 2022. I wholeheartedly recommend it. So the only film that I'm going to talk about today that maybe people aren't as familiar with is actually a documentary. It's called The National Parks: America's Best Idea by Ken Burns. And Ken Burns is an American filmmaker. He does mostly documentaries about very American subjects. He does a lot of his work is published on PBS, so it's that kind of vibe, if you know what I'm talking about. But I absolutely love this 12-hour documentary on the history and the legacy of national parks. America was the first country to have a national park. That would be Yellowstone in Wyoming. And it's an idea that so many other nations have adopted, and I think for very good measure. So Ken Burns actually reminds me very much of the American author and historian Timothy Egan, who also writes about very American subjects. But Timothy Egan came out with a book a little while ago called The Big Burn, Teddy Roosevelt and the Fire That Saved America, which is on its surface about a conflagration called the Big Burn. Now in 1910, this fire decimated really big areas of Washington and Idaho and Montana. But, if you go onto, the internet and you Google biggest wildfires by acreage in America, there's going to be a whole bunch that pop up. But the first two are wildfire seasons. So the first on the list is the California wildfire season in 2020. Second on the list is the same, but for Texas in 2011. And both of these collectively burned around, 4 million acres each, but they represent sometimes thousands of fires within that number. And they're from, across an entire wildfire season. Number 3 on that list is the 1910 fire, the Big Burn, which in the course of only, 2 days burned 3 million acres, right? So this is a huge fire that decimated just huge amounts of area in a forest. And so this book covers the destruction and the events around that big fire. But I would argue that, maybe even a bigger portion of the book is actually about America and America's public lands. Now the subtitle is, I think, slightly deceptive again. I think they've included Teddy Roosevelt because he's a recognizable name. But so much of this book has to do with actually Gifford Pinchot and his relationship with Teddy Roosevelt. And Gifford Pinchot is maybe the most famous American forester. And together, him and TR were responsible for huge amounts of conservation of American forests and public lands. I think there's this really interesting distinction between the idea of conservation, which is the smart use, I guess, of public lands, and preservation, which is protecting lands from use hard stop, which is maybe like something that John Muir, a really famous preservationist, believed. And so this book goes into the details between conservation and preservation, two ideas that weren't really well established or spread within the American population during the time of this fire, and how the events of this fire really changed American perception and belief and support of American public lands and the whole idea of conservation. Now, I don't think, you're gonna like this book or this film if you don't already know you like American history. I think somebody who doesn't already know they enjoy that as a subject matter to learn about are going to find both of these really boring. But if you know you like it, then I totally recommend these, especially if you are also a lover of American public lands. And yeah, there was just something about, I guess, the narration of the Big Burn that felt so similar to the narration that you get in Ken Burns films. And so, yeah, I think they're both wonderful, wonderful things to learn from, and I enjoyed both of them quite a bit. So yeah, those are 4 nonfiction pieces and films that I think are really similar, that if you like the film, you might like those books. I'm always down to talk about other book pairings if you guys have suggestions to give to me. And yeah, I think if I had to rank them, I would probably put Riddle of the Labyrinth, and then Veritas, and then The Big Burn, and lastly How to Clone a Mammoth. But all of these pieces were really memorable because, I decided to talk about them here, so obviously I thought they were worth talking about. And yeah, if you read them, you let me know, and I'm always excited to talk about books with with any of y'all. So I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you next time.